Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Yes, so if you remember, two nights ago, we were discussing the first verse, and there are the six vegas, or six urges, pushings: speech, the mind, anger, and the tongue, belly, and genitals. So we discussed speech and the mind. So we have the other four to go, and that's where we're going to start this evening. But actually, before we do that, what we'll do is we will chant the verse itself. Yes, let us just remind ourselves by chanting the verse itself. Vachavegam manasakrodha vegam, jiva vegam udrapasta vegam, etan vegan yo vishaheta dira, sarvam apimam pritavim sashishyat. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Okay, that's our verse. And very famous verse, and we already Krishna. Yeah, we already started the explanation, so let's just carry on here. Right, so we discussed already about speech and the mind. So let's go on now to anger. If you've got a copy of Nectar of Instruction, it would be a very good idea to open it. You could have downloaded the PDF that I put up the other day. I hope you've done that. It's free of charge. It's from Krishna.com, and it's all completely bona fide. So, then you'll be able to follow on. Okay, so let's go on then. Let's go on to anger. And an interesting point, I felt it's a very anger in our PDF file. The discussion of anger starts on page 4, right at the bottom, and goes over to the top of page 5. Right, so just one interesting point I felt is that Srila Prabhupada, it's sort of like just one paragraph really, which he dedicates to discussing this particular vega or this particular problem. He makes the point. Actually, he says it twice. He says it twice in the one paragraph about anger, that first of all he says Let me just read it. Prabhupada says, we cannot stop anger altogether. That's interesting, isn't it? And then just over the page in our PDF, Prabhupada says again, Krodha, anger, cannot be stopped, but it can be applied rightly. Well, that's something to think about. It's something to consider. We have to consider it very carefully, because it's not as simple as some might think that, it's okay just to get angry. It's not a problem. It can be an extremely big problem. Yeah. But the way that Prabhupada presents it in the purport in that one paragraph, if you've got the PDF from the bottom of page 4 to the top of page 5, the way Prabhupada applies it is that we should become angry if some devotee is offended, or if the Lord is offended, then we should become angry. Yeah. But if we are apparently offended, if we're insulted and this sort of thing, then that we should tolerate, and we should not become angry. We should definitely not become angry. So, but in the application, we have to be extremely careful. Well, let me just carry on and mention in that paragraph there in the purport, Prabhupada gives 2 examples of devotees becoming angry when there was offense against the Lord or other devotees like that, some aparad against the Lord or against Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of Hanuman. Yesterday was Ram Navami, and surely there was some talk about Hanuman. Coming up shortly, I'll have to check the date, will be Hanuman Jayanti, the appearance day of Hanuman. So we may well have some special program, we'll see. We often do, to glorify Hanuman as the great servant of Lord Ram. So anyway, yeah, Hanuman and Arjuna, they became angry when there were offenses. Hanuman, we mentioned actually last night, he jumped over to Lanka, located Sita, and then different soldiers came to attack him, but he just wiped them out. And then that one general came, if you remember, and he was speaking critically, offensively about Lord Ram. And to do that in front of Hanuman, it's just a really big mistake. So what happened? Hanuman urinated in his mouth. But then Hanuman let himself become arrested. And then he heard lots more blasphemy from Ravana and others when he was arrested. And then they set his tail on fire, but then he escaped and just went zooming around Lanka, setting the city on fire. This is what Prabhupada's referring to. It's like the famous example of Hanuman becoming angry and expressing that anger towards the nonsense people. Then Arjuna, of course, Arjuna fought in the Battle of Kurukshetra. That's what Prabhupada is referring to. He fought in the Battle of Kurukshetra, and Prabhupada makes the point in the purport that if you're going to fight, you have to be angry. If you're not angry, how can you fight? If you're just, well, it's okay, don't worry about it, yeah, that sort of thing, how can you fight? But Arjuna really fought. He really fought hard because so many offenses had been committed by the Kauravas against Krishna, against different Vaishnavas, like his brothers, like against Draupadi. Oh, so many offenses. So when Krishna told him, you must fight, he understood, yes, I must fight because of these offenses, I must fight and give it a good fight, and he did. So anger was there, but it's Krishna conscious anger. But for ourselves, we should be careful. I mean, definitely, if some devotee gets attacked, we should definitely try and defend the devotees. If people attack the temple, we have to defend the deities and so on like that. And even if it's not a physical fight, like if there's some legal situation, so it's like a fight, arguing in this way or that way, people trying to attack the Krishna consciousness movement, or if people make some criticisms in the newspapers, then we have to respond strongly. But we should be very careful. The first thing I want to mention is that there's a classic case in Bhagavad Gita where anger is mentioned and emphasized strongly in a very negative type of way. This is in Bhagavad Gita. It's in chapter 2. What is it? It's verse 62. Very famous verse. And 63 is also famous. But in terms of anger, well, we can read both actually. So chapter 2, verse 62. Jayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodho bijayate. Krodha means anger. While contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops. And from lust, anger arises. Okay, so we'll talk about that. But let's just read verse 63 also, because it's a continuation. Krodhad bhavati samoha, samohat smriti vibrama, smriti brahmshad buddhi nasho, buddhi nashat pranashati. From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So like I say, we have to be very careful about anger, although there is a place in Krishna consciousness for it, but it's not just like every day or regularly. It definitely shouldn't be, because then we will commit offense. We'll commit offense, and it will be bad for us. So as far as these two verses are concerned, the point is, because it also involves lust, from attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. Now, we are, in a few minutes, we're going to discuss about the genitals a little. And that, of course, there we're talking about lust. So there's a place, at least there can be a place in Krishna consciousness for that sort of attraction, the male-female attraction, which essentially means lust. And that, of course, is Krishna-conscious Grihastha life. So there's a place, but you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful about lust. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But from what Krishna says here, there's a real connection, a relationship between lust and anger. That if we allow ourselves to get attracted and perhaps meditate and whatever like that in lusty ways, then anger is very likely to come. And anger is very destructive. Lust, of course, is Rajagun. Anger is Tamagun. Lust is the mode of passion. Anger is the mode of ignorance. So why Krishna has put them together in this way is that people become attracted to what they see or feel to be enjoyable objects, enjoyable people, whatever it may be. So they have this idea, oh yes, I can enjoy. And then lust develops to the point that they act on it. They act on it. And they acquire whatever the object is for their enjoyment, and then they engage in the lusty activity, particularly sex life. But it could be, there's so many things that people do in this world for sense gratification, just for enjoyment. It's all part of lust in different ways. So that's their idea. Their idea is we are going to enjoy, and therefore they get what they feel is the enjoyable object, and they try to enjoy it. But in this material world, even though things look enjoyable, but they don't have the potency, the capability to give us the enjoyment that we think they're going to give us. Yeah, this is the thing. They look very nice. They may look very nice. But when we actually involve ourselves with them, the experience, there may be a little sort of brief pleasure, but then it's gone. Then it's gone. And so as a result, frustration arises. Frustration. And when people become frustrated, they become angry. So like this, anger arises when people's expectations and hopes for enjoyment through lust don't work out. And then they think, no, why didn't I enjoy? Why couldn't I enjoy? I should have enjoyed. Like this, they become frustrated and they become angry. So in this way, there's a connection between lust and anger. But just anger in and of itself, like we said, it's at least, unless it's really being engaged in Krishna's service, which may not be that easy, but yeah, there's a place for it. Lust being tamagun, lust, anger being tamagun, it really disturbs our being. It really disturbs our being. And the consciousness goes down. And who has become happy from becoming angry with someone? Particularly someone who may have offended us. It's one thing, like the example of using it in Krishna's service, but just in our own situation, in our own lives, someone steals our samosa and we get very upset. I mean, that's just a joke, but sometimes some things happen like that. And under normal circumstances, a person on the material level would get angry. But devotees have to be very careful. There's a verse. Actually, there's an incident in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a really important one. It's in the 4th canto. It's part of the story of Dhruva Maharaj. I imagine you're a little familiar, at least maybe you're very familiar with the story of Dhruva Maharaj. It's a long story. His father, the king, sort of rejected him. So he made up his mind, I'm going to teach my father a lesson. I'm going to show him who's cool around here. I'm going to get a kingdom bigger than his. And then I'll show him, you think you're a big king. Look at me. So then he met Narada Muni, who preached to him, and he became a devotee, and he met the Lord. But then the story continues. The story continues. And this is where this point about anger arises. And it's actually very important. Is that later on, a yaksha killed the brother of Dhruva Maharaj. A yaksha killed the brother of Dhruva Maharaj. And Dhruva became angry. He became so angry that he basically single-handed declared war on the yaksha race. And he just attacked the whole yaksha community. And that's a big community. And he was just killing them, and it was just a ghastly scene. He was so angry. So in the middle of all this, Swayambhuva Manu came and approached Dhruva Maharaj and basically preached to him, stop being so angry. Of course, he was killing yakshas who had nothing to do at all with his brother being killed. They were just basically innocent people. That was one thing. That was one thing, a not unimportant thing. But the particular thing which Swayambhuva Manu preached to him about, I'm going to read the verse. It's the 4th canto, chapter 11, verse 32. 4:11:32. And Manu says, or is it the Lord saying? Anyway, whoever it is says, a person who desires liberation from this material world should not fall under the control of anger, because when bewildered by anger, one becomes a source of dread for all others. That's not nice, is it? For all others, if you become angry enough, like Dhruva was so angry, he's attacking a whole race. So he became a source of dread for all the yakshas. And that's not good. That's very bad. And if we develop a habit of becoming angry, sometimes I call it having a short fuse. Having a short fuse. You got a fuse length problem. A fuse length problem. You need a longer fuse. You just blow up too quickly. Then, like if you're in the community of devotees, and it's kind of insulated community. There may be 100, there may only be 20, there may be 100, there may be 200 or 300. But if you really get into the habit, you're regularly becoming angry, you'll get a reputation. You'll definitely get a reputation. I mean, a well-deserved bad reputation. And then when people see you coming, then they'll think, oops, let's get out of the way. I don't want to meet him because you never know. He might become angry. Just like, it's a slight digression, but in the pastimes of Lord Caitanya, when he was at school, then he was not manifesting himself as a devotee or as the Lord, but definitely not as a devotee. And indeed, regularly, he would sort of say critical things about devotees. And devotees would want to preach to him, but he would just start some argument about logic with them, some sort of debate. They wanted to preach to him and help him, but he just started a debate. So they felt you just can't deal with him. You can't deal with him. It's too much trouble. So therefore it's described, it's particularly there in Chaitanya Bhagavat actually, but it's also in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that when the people would see him coming, at least his school colleagues and people of a similar age, after school when they're just moving around in town or somewhere, when they'd see him coming, they'd go the other way because he got such a reputation for just being too argumentative. Yeah. So we don't want to become that sort of person, as is said in this verse, to become a source of dread for all others, like in our community, in our temple. You follow the idea. Okay, let's see. Well, there's another example, just final point here in the purport. Just the final point. In this paragraph in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that, where is it actually? Does he make the point? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. It's earlier in the paragraph, actually. But here I am addressing it at the end. That's okay. So Srila Prabhupada gives the example of Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya's sort of motto, you could say, or definitely something that was really just such an integral part of his being, and the way he conducted himself when he manifested himself as a devotee. He was very gentle and kind. And his sort of motto, so to speak, you could say, was Trinada Pisa Nichena Tarora Pisa Hishnuna, Amanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. We all know that verse, that one should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and ready to offer all respects to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy names of the Lord constantly. So that was just such an integral part of the nature of Lord Caitanya when he was manifesting himself as a devotee. But when Jagai and Madai offended Nityananda, Lord Caitanya, he became like fire. He became like a volcano, very drastic and dramatic. And he was going to kill them. You know that story. Yeah. So there can be a place for it in Krishna consciousness, but watch out. Just watch out. Okay, let's go on to the tongue. And Prabhupada we're not going to get onto the questions, I can see, but that's all right. We'll finish verse 1. Prabhupada doesn't talk about it so much. It's a paragraph, but he doesn't really get into it so much. But basically the point he makes is that we as devotees should eat prasadam and not other things. And he does mention in the paragraph that one should take prasad at scheduled times and not eat in restaurants or sweetmeat shops simply to satisfy the whims of the tongue or belly. In this paragraph, Prabhupada is talking about the belly also, because there's no further discussion about the belly at this point until we go a bit further on in the purport. So yes. So devotees should take prasadam, should make sure that whatever they're going to eat, that it is offered nicely and cooked by devotees nicely. And only we hardly should even mention it, but only in quite extraordinary circumstances should there be a question of eating something, for example, which is not cooked by devotees and not nicely offered. You may just do a sort of ad hoc offering on the street or something like that, Yeah. So that's important. That's very important. And then the genitals, the tongue, belly, and genitals. So genitals is the last mentioned of the six. And the explanation Prabhupada gives is that the genitals should be used to beget Krishna-conscious children. In other words, I think some of you out there in Facebook Live land or Instagram land, some of you may laugh when I say this, but actually it's very accurate. That sex life really is not don't mind me saying it, it's not a recreational activity. It's not a recreational activity. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be for begetting children according to the standards of Krishna consciousness as given by Srila Prabhupada. I don't want to get involved in some discussion about, sort of going into details and special situations and what if your husband or wife is not a devotee, and I mean, there are special situations, it's true. But the basic point is, which is what is being addressed here, is that the genitals are for begetting Krishna conscious children. And that's basically that. Yes. And so therefore Prabhupada says that actually, maybe not here, is it? But actually Prabhupada says here, that this movement encourages marriage. Encourages. Yes. We're not trying to just, be strict on people and restrict them. We encourage marriage in Krishna consciousness. And if it's not in Krishna consciousness, if it's just sort of a playground for lust, well then Krishna consciousness really goes down, and people just, in so many cases, they lose any sort of like significant taste of the nectar of Krishna consciousness. So then Prabhupada says, there's a little one paragraph statement here, conclusion. When one is fully practiced in the methods of Krishna conscious control, he can become qualified to be a bona fide spiritual master. True. That was what Rupa Goswami said in the verse, but we also expanded it a little and brought it to a sort of, what you might call, for people like us, is just a practical, very practical, everyday level. Become spiritual master. Well, one devotee, his name is Kripa Moya Prabhu. He is in England. He's an ISKCON guru, and he's a really nice devotee. When he first went to the VIHE to study Prabhupada's books there, Vrindavan Institute for Higher Education, he was really impressed, and he had a wonderful experience, and he really felt he learned a lot and it helped him. So at the end, different devotees were asked to make little statements, what was your experience like? How was it? How did you like it? So his was, it's a good one. What is it now? Before you become fully Krishna conscious and save the world, go to the VIHE and save yourself. It's a good one. Yeah, we're not going to be able to do much saving of others if we're not saved ourselves, at least sort of to a reasonable degree. And that's what these things are talking about. These urges are there. We all know. How much experience have we had? Just so much. Yeah, we know all about it, you could say. And those are the main things practically which are holding us back from progressing in Krishna consciousness, which means they're holding us back from experiencing the nectar of Krishna consciousness, the happiness, the ecstasy. Yeah, so what to speak? We've mentioned it already before, a couple of days ago. What to speak of becoming a guru and saving the world? No, what he said, Kripa Moya, before you become a guru and save the world, go to the VIHE and save yourself. Yeah. Before you become a guru and save the world, go to the VIHE and save yourself. Yeah, so before you do that, before you become a guru, you got to save yourself. You got to, as we said right at the beginning of this seminar, you got to become steady, stable, nishta. You have to. So that when there's some ups and downs, which inevitably will be there from time to time, then you're not going to go up or down, but you'll be able to go through, and take them in your stride. Yes, very important. I can give an example. It's a good example. Some of you may have heard of it before. That some devotees were driving with Prabhupada in India in the same car. There's maybe 3 of them or plus a driver in the car. And they're driving along somewhere, like village area, and they came upon an accident which had just happened, means like 20 seconds ago, or 30 seconds, something like that, in which a truck had literally driven over the top of some youngish man. Not just over the top, but knocked him over onto his back, and then the wheels of the truck ran over half his body, means one side, I don't know which side, but just say maybe, he's knocked over, and the whole right side from the foot to the head, whatever, is just squashed in the road. And the other half is sort of, raised. What a sight, what a scene. So the devotees just happened on this scene, and they saw this, and the devotees were saying, wow, look at that, etc., etc. But then they looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was just sitting there. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Right. So we need at least to become nishta, to become steady in Krishna consciousness, so we're not just being forced by these things, forced into situations which are detrimental for us. We've got to learn how to deal with them through being fully engaged in Krishna consciousness, so that we don't become victimized by these things, but rather so we can carry on executing the process, and through doing that, we'll carry on experiencing the nectar of Krishna consciousness. Now, just to conclude, there's a couple of pages more, actually, of purport in which Prabhupada is just sort of, touching on this and that and whatever about different of these 6 things. And I won't go through it all in detail, but let's see. Oh, yeah. Prabhupada makes a point in regard to the genitals and in regard to the tongue and the belly. Prabhupada makes a very important point, which one of you, I've got all these questions which you've submitted, which we'll begin with tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. So one of you asked, is there a connection between tongue, belly, genitals? And Prabhupada does say in the later part of the purport that there is sort of like a straight line connection between the two. Means, particularly in regard to eating, means the tongue, if the tongue is too keen to eat nicely and sort of plentifully, and so therefore you're eating a lot of tasty things. And they're going to the belly, of course, and then the belly is becoming heavy and expanding, physically expanding. Then the way Prabhupada presents it is then that the weight of the belly, then it exerts pressure on the genitals. And then the genitals become more easily stimulated, and one more easily has difficulty of that sort. So Prabhupada does discuss that. Yeah. So let's just, and you know what, in regard to that tongue, belly and genitals, Prabhupada recommends in the purport chanting the Sarira Avijajal prayer. In other words, when we eat, it should be in a prayerful mood, not just we parrot off the prayer, but we actually, with our consciousness, we enter into that mood. And then we shouldn't be victimized too much by the tongue, first of all, because that's where it starts. So then Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying that we must become Goswami and not Go Das. We need to do like that through Krishna consciousness. And he quotes Prahlad Maharaj right at the end of the purport. Let me just check, where are we? Whoops. Oops. Okay. Krishna. Yeah, it's right at the end of the purport. It's Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th Canto, Chapter 5, verse 30. Prahlad Maharaj says, Matir na Krishne paratasvato va, mito bipadyeta grihavratanam, adantago bia vishatam tamishram, punapunas charavita charavananam. For those who have decided to continue their existence in this material world for the gratification of their senses, there is no chance of becoming Krishna conscious, not by personal endeavor, by instruction from others, or by joint conferences. Anyway, Prabhupada so expert at expressing things. So, but the translation continues. They are dragged by the unbridled senses into the darkest region of ignorance, and thus they madly engage in what is called chewing the chewed. Hare Krishna. Okay, devotees, so we've basically covered verse 1 and the purport for verse 1. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock, of course, tomorrow, 5 o'clock South African time, we'll chant japa. Everyone is welcome, whoever likes. Otherwise, at 6 o'clock South African time, 7 o'clock Moscow time, we will go on to verse number 2. And we'll start discussing that. And, it's a very interesting verse. There's a lot we can all learn there. Anyway, for the time being, thank you all very much for your attention and your participation. I really appreciate it greatly. Srila Prabhupada ki. Hare Krishna.